Next we have highly sought after panelist from Association of California State Employees with Disabilities, or ACSED. The panel consists of Scott Richmond, immediate past president of ACSED. Scott worked for the state of California, DHCS, Department of Healthcare Services, for 22 and a half years. And he retired as a staff services manager too. He's been active in the disability rights, independent living movement since the 1970s, has served on wide variety of boards and committees in both public and private nonprofit sectors, including his work on the Department of Rehab's Advisory Committee and its Assistive Technology Advisory Council. He holds a bachelor's degree in government from CSU and a master's degree in counseling from the same institution. And that's Scott Richmond. Our next panelist within that same ACSED group is Dr. Catherine Campisi, who is a well-known expert on disability issues. She served as director of California Department of Rehab for 7 years. I guess she was the predecessor of Joe Xavier. And her career increased into higher education and employment opportunities for people with disabilities. Prior to serving as a director at DOOR, she served as the Assistant Deputy Director of Transition Programs and Deputy Director of the Independent Living and Assistive Technology Division. She also served as the statewide coordinator of the Disabled Student Program and Services Unit at Chancellor's Office of the California Community Colleges. In addition, she held leadership position in national and statewide organization and had received numerous awards for her work. Catherine, who has a PhD in social psychology, currently serves on the Board of Association of California State Employees with Disabilities, or ACSED. Very accomplished woman. And our final panelist, you all know, is Dan Clark. You probably know Dan. He is a frequent guest at SDAC. Dan is a retired state employee and is a member of ACSED Board of Directors and chairs the awards committee. Mr. Clark worked for 34 years with the Department of Rehab as a vocational rehab counselor and a community resource specialist. Dan has been a member of ACSED since 1975 and participated in various projects and activities. Dan holds a master's degree in vocational rehab counseling from Sacramento State University and a postgraduate certificate in rehab administration from San Diego State University. Let's welcome our panelists, our esteemed panelists from ACSED, and the floor is yours, panelists.
Thank you, Bobby, for the introduction. I'm pleased to be here. How we came to be here today really basically started with the training symposium of last year when we do the awards. We've been asked several times for the awards to talk about what are the things that stand out in the nomination when we do the DAC of the Year nominations. What stands out that kind of got us to select certain winners and so forth. And usually we don't have enough time. So I had talked to Bobby and asked, hey, maybe we could have some time here at SDAC to talk to you about the nominations process and get to share with you some of the things that have stood out. And so he said, yes, we'd have some time here. So we've actually come here to you to kind of talk to you a little bit about specifically with ACSED with the DAC of the Year. For most of you, you probably know that every year we send out an invitation for DAC of the Year nominations in which you and your department share with us what your activities are, what the structure's like, how it works, what progress you're making, and so forth. And from there, we select programs that we feel are showing that look pretty good. Now, So it's sort of subjective, but it also gives us an idea of what's going on and so forth. And I think we want to share some of that with you, but we also, I think, as a result of reviewing it, we want to kind of go over a little about the basics. So myself, Catherine, and Scott here will want to do a little short presentation to you, kind of going back to, and it'll answer a question for one of the prior persons that asked about the DAC. Talk a little about the structure of why we have it and what goes on, what are some of the statutory issues, as well as some of the guidelines that we ask about through CalHR, and then about some general groups, effective activities that go on, as well as maybe some specifics that we have seen in recent DAC of the Year nominations. So to start off, I'd like to see Scott, are you available?
Scott is present, looks like, but he's not on camera. Scott, if you're able to unmute, please go ahead and speak. And Scott, if you're having difficulty in unmuting, please feel free to call in. You can dial 1-669-900-6833, and you should be able to be connected to this. The meeting ID is 476-738-3032.
Let me ask you, while Scott is trying to get hooked up here, I have to say that Joe's presentation was sort of apropos to kind of the things we want to touch on here, mainly because of he was talking about AB 313, which has just been passed and is going to be implemented. I think, you know, that's policy. That's the regulation and law. And now it filters down to people, the boots on the ground. How does that work out? And I think the DACs can play play a big role in helping to see the fruition of AB 313 and help you address the requirements of 313. So I hope that in this presentation we'll touch base with some of those things with you. You know, well, let's see. Well, let's see. In a matter.
Hi, Dan. This is Catherine. I think Ralph is we're gonna try to reach Scott and see if we can get him on. But do you want to go ahead to the next part, or what do you want to do?
Well, I have part of it here, but let me okay. Basically, we were going to start with the regulations of how did the DAC come to be what it's supposed to be. And basically, the question was asked earlier to Joe Xavier about, you know, what is it? You know, we want to talk to individuals. Our issues here and with the DAC is systemic. We're talking about policies and procedures that apply to everybody. We're not here, and DACs are not part of personnel issues and so forth. So the issue is just it's opening up the pathways from a policy position to help people with disabilities go and be included in the workforce. And so what happened with well, actually the code is 19795 is the government code that authorizes and requires that all departments have a DAC, and that the DAC is made up and is actually, again, as an advisor to the department, to the director on disability issues. Again, there was a saying in the disability community, nothing about us without us. And that's how this came to be, so that when issues with disability come up, the disability community can advise the director on how to address certain issues that they're presented with. And so that's how it came to be. And that more so it's supposed to be worked through the EEO officer, and the EEO officer basically it directly answers to the director on these issues. And the EO department, again, has to deal with the sort of the diversity concerns of the department with respect not only to disability, but other hiring policies and so forth, and civil rights issues. But the intent of having a DAC is to help address, overcome, and correct the underrepresentation of persons with disabilities in a department. And that's the main focus, is to try to look at, and oh, Scott's here, I think. Scott's trying to get on. Okay.
It looks like he's still on mute. Catherine, can
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, Scott, you're still on mute. Well, can you hear us, Scott? You're still on mute.
I can hear you.
Excellent.
Hey.
Welcome,
Now we can
Scott.
hear you. We got you now. Yeah, there you go. Okay.
We couldn't start this
Wonderful.
meeting without you.
Scott, I was just talking a little bit about the government code 19795, which established the DACs. If you want to kind of take it on, you.
Yeah, I'm ready, Dan. Can I?
Okay, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. I probably have the most boring part of the program today, but you can bear with me for about the next 10 minutes. I'd like to walk you through some of the historical aspects and also the legal basis for what a disability advisory committee is and why we have them. At any rate, I'd like to set the Wayback Machine for the 1970s. And I think we can establish the genesis of the disability advisory committees to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and specifically Section 504 of the Act. Section 504 provided that no person based on disability could be subjected to discriminatory treatment under any program or activity funded by the federal government. There were a host of federal regulations that were promulgated pursuant to that. And then the state of California in 1977 adopted Assembly Bill 803. And Assembly Bill 803 basically codified in state law, Government Code Section 11,135 through 11,139.5, the federal requirements, plus a few additional requirements that were unique to the state of California. Well, as you can imagine, all of this flurry of regulatory and legal activity caused a lot of scurrying around in state and local government. And the state agencies and departments really needed to do a comprehensive assessment of how they could make sure that people with disabilities had access to programs, services, and employment, and that there weren't existing barriers, whether those would be architectural, transportation, communications, whatever the barrier might happen to be, that those would be removed and that programs and facilities and workplaces would be accessible to people with disabilities. Well, in 1979, our predecessor organization, Disabled in State Service, along with some other disability organizations, sponsored AB 1309. And AB 1309 was the vehicle that created disability advisory committees as we know them today. And the reason that happened was it was felt at the time that there was a real need for an internal mechanism within departments to help state departments come into compliance with Section 504 and the AB 803 legislation, but that it was also exceedingly important that departments had an understanding of how to include people with disabilities in their workforces and their programs on an ongoing basis. So I'm going to just read you something that may help to explain what a disability advisory committee is and why we have them. It starts with, as I indicated, the AB 1309 legislation, which is codified at Government Code Section 19795, paragraph B, subparagraph 1. And I'm going to read it to you. It requires all state agencies to establish a committee of employees with disabilities or interested persons that have an interest in, are sensitive to, or knowledge of disability issues to advise the agency head or director on matters related to the formulation and implementation of a plan to overcome and correct any underrepresentation determined to exist under Government Code Section 19234. Section 19234 says, each agency shall annually review its hiring activities designed to achieve the employment objectives as specified in Government Code Section 1933C to determine if any category of individuals with disabilities have been disproportionately excluded from employment on a non-job related basis. So that's all the legalese. What I think it illustrates is that one of the key jobs of a disability advisory committee is to advise the director of an agency or a department on how that department can meet its labor force goals, which, as probably most of you know, labor force parity for individuals with disabilities is 16.6% of the department's total workforce. So what we have is a process where the department assesses its workforce, determines what the representation level is, and it either meets or it doesn't meet labor force parity. If it doesn't meet labor force parity, in theory, the department is supposed to set some goals and adopt some strategies to be able to do that. I'm going to talk in a minute or two about AB 313 because even though departments have been required to report that information in the past, the law hasn't been quite as specific in terms of the reporting mechanisms and the actions that a department needs to take once it's reported and it's still underrepresented in terms of people with disabilities. But really quickly, before I get into that, I'm going to turn to some guidelines for disability advisory committees. The Department of Human Resources has put out a set of guidelines that I think can be really useful if a committee is just being started or if it's relatively new and still trying to get itself underway. The first thing is to establish a set of operating ground rules, or sometimes they're referred to as bylaws. Those should include a statement of purpose, a statement of responsibilities, the method for recruiting and selecting members of the committee, what a committee really needs is structures and procedures, and the bylaws can establish the numbers of people on the committee, the method of selection, where the members are to be drawn from geographically or professionally within a department. Another thing is dispersion by disability type, so that there's a mix of people with apparent and non-apparent disabilities, mobility-related disabilities, sensory disabilities, pretty much the whole gambit of disabilities. And that to the extent possible, consider factors such as race, ethnicity, gender, in addition to a mix between headquarters and field staff. Because as we know, if we worked for the state for any number of years, there's a big difference between what life is like in a headquarters operation versus what it's like in the field. Some of the things that are important to consider about a committee are making sure that adequate staff time is allocated, whether that be 8 hours a month, 10 hours a month, for an employee to be allowed to work on specific committee activities, that there's money in the department's budget to cover costs and the resources the committee needs to do its work. One of the big expenses once upon a time was travel for meetings. That's not quite as relevant anymore since so many of our meetings are conducted the way we're doing them right here now. But support services and reasonable accommodation need to be included. If a member needs reasonable accommodation to perform a specific committee task or function, it's the department's obligation to provide that reasonable accommodation. Basically, the committee needs to be adequately supported in both terms of staffing and budgeting to be able to do its work. Meetings need to be held on a regular basis, usually at the same place or the same time. The meetings need to be publicized in advance, and agendas need to be sent out that include the subject matter that's going to be taken up at meetings. There needs to be minutes and records kept, because committees are always turning over members. Ideally, there should be a mix of new members and experienced members. But one of the ways that you can get new members up to speed is to have written records of committee proceedings and what has gone before. Committees really need to be effective. They need to be project-driven. There's different things committees can do. They can promote the disability survey within departments. They can identify and remove architectural or attitudinal barriers. They can work with the Human Resources Office to try to modify personnel practices that may be creating stumbling blocks for people to obtain employment within a department. So there's a whole variety of things that a committee can do if it wants to be proactive and to really have an impact on its department. So that I don't take up all the time, I'm just going to kind of hurry through how AB 313 ties into all of this. And that is the annual assessment of the department's workforce and whether or not people with disabilities are adequately represented within the workforce. Departments have always been required to assess and report on the status of their workforce. But now with AB 313, the department needs to not only do that, but they have to set goals to alleviate the underrepresentation, identify strategies to be able to do that, and to report those annually to CalHR. Then it'll be CalHR's responsibility to review and approve the department's submission. And if a department is found to be deficient in terms of its efforts, CalHR has the authority to have the department prepare a corrective action plan. And that would include some specific processes or techniques the department would use to alleviate or eliminate its underrepresentation, whether that be department-wide or whether that would be in a particular job category or a classification or class series. The department would be responsible for identifying the ways that it was going to overcome and correct that underrepresentation, just like it specifies in the law that I quoted at the top of my presentation. So the advisory committee can really play a key role in making sure that the department is doing that it happens, and it can have valuable input in terms of assisting the department with ways that it can try to overcome representation. Earlier in the program, when Joe Xavier was talking, I know Joe said that the department should make recommendations and state the reason why they were making the recommendations, but not necessarily tell the department how to do it. Well, I guess I have to respectfully disagree with Joe in one respect, in that sometimes departments need advice and input from a committee on the ABCs of how a particular kind of underrepresentation might be overcome. So in addition to the recommendation and the reason why, it might not hurt for the committee to illustrate a series of steps that it believes the department might undertake to eliminate its underrepresentation. So before I take up all the time, I'm going to throw it over to my fellow panelist, Catherine Campisi, and she's going to talk about some more fun stuff. So Catherine, you want to take it away?
Sure. Hello, can everybody hear me? Can you hear me,
Yes.
Dan?
Yes, we
Okay,
can all
thank
hear
you.
you.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much. First of all, I don't know, are you still on, Jerry Gibbons? Are you still there? If Jerry is on, I just wanted to say that this morning, for another purpose, I needed to look up the number of LEAP classifications, and I am so impressed with the breadth and number that have been added. So I just wanted to congratulate CalHR for their leadership on that. It's so exciting to see the breadth and the range that are there now. And I know, you know, we want more, we want them all, but it's just really very different and very exciting. And so thank you so much.
Thank you, Kat.
You're very welcome. I wanted to also thank Scott for his presentation, because Scott, I didn't know some of those things about the history of the DACs. It was very informative. And also you covered some of the areas that I didn't have down about things that are really effective practices and things that DACs can do to be effective, so especially those administrative structural things that really are important, because they create the foundation for having a stable DAC that does meet on an ongoing basis and has some consistent rules to go by. But I'm going to talk in a more general sense about some of the things that we've seen in a number of the submissions that have come through for the awards, and just things that Scott, myself, Dan, and others know from experience that effective DACs will be focusing on. And then I believe Dan is going to come back and talk to you about some of the even more specific things that we've seen from some of the award-winning departments. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. There are other things that can be done, and hopefully our presentation will lead you to think about and brainstorm some ideas that would be effective. The first thing, it seems kind of self-evident, but we've seen a lot of this in the past that lets us know that people might need to have a little bit of focus on it, is that your DAC should focus on employment. That the activities that it does should be directly linked to creating an inclusive, welcoming, and effective workplace for persons with disabilities. That can be both making sure that people that are already there are accommodated, that the site is accessible, that numerous accommodations are in place, that there is training on, sensitivity and how to work with people with various disabilities, and also some of the accessibility strategies, so that people who are there can do their work and also can feel comfortable and welcome. We have seen in the past some DACs that focused a little bit more on whether it was social activities or doing good things in the community, supporting sort of philanthropic activities, but they weren't related to employment. And so, we would suggest that you try to keep a focus on employment. An additional area is, we've talked a little bit, Scott talked a little bit about looking at these areas where there's underrepresentation. And I think a lot of times departments struggle with how to outreach to groups of people and individuals with disabilities to get a pool of qualified applicants when they do have job openings. Because nothing can be more frustrating to a department than to want to hire people with disabilities and have openings, but then have to come back and say, but nobody with a disability is applying. So one of the things that DAC can really do in terms of employment is help be part of that outreach strategy, both to do it themselves and to also give the department suggestions on what they can do to make sure that they're doing effective outreach to draw in applicants with disabilities. The other one is having sufficient strong leadership, and that the ones that we've seen that end up usually doing very well are departments that have strong and positive and engaging leadership by the department director, that periodically, not at every meeting, but periodically, that the DAC has direct access to the director. We know oftentimes the EEO officer is the link to that, but that there should be times during the year that there is a process of communication directly between the DAC and the director, and that the department's leadership is committed to recruitment of hiring and promoting and retaining people with disabilities. So you can help grow that from the DAC. But when you have that, I see a question that says, what do you do if your department's leadership is not effective, is not receptive? And we may have a few ideas for you, but it's certainly helpful when you're in a department that already has that. I would say that the Newsom administration has a significant commitment to diversity. In fact, Governor Newsom himself has dyslexia, which is considered a disability. He's very open about it. He's written several books. And so I would hope and encourage department leaders to follow the example of their governor and talk about and welcome individuals with disabilities into state government. Another thing that we see is autonomy. We know that in many, many cases, the involvement of the EEO officer is very strong in DACs, and that's very important, and that it's part of other diversity efforts. And that too is excellent and very important. But we would like to see the DAC being able to make some independent recommendations and not totally be dominated by the EEO officer, or be where the EEO officer is the voice of the DAC totally. So the DAC chair should have very strong involvement, work in partnership with the EEO officer, but we'd like to see them have some independent recognition. I think Scott went over regular meetings and the standing rules and just that sort of administrative infrastructure that allows interested parties to know that there is what to expect if they decide to join the DAC. Also that things don't fall through the cracks of various projects, and just to make sure that you have a stable structure. Training, what we've seen in a number of the DACs that have won the awards is that they conduct very robust training programs in their departments. Now, those can be either lunchtime trainings. Now we have Zoom, so they can be virtual, so that they can reach out to all the staff, and they could be either, with some that we've seen were how to deal with COVID and people with disabilities, some of the issues. Some were even as specific as what do you do about the need for interpreters and captioning and other accommodations in Zoom and other virtual meeting platforms. Sometimes they're how to work with issues surrounding people with specific disabilities. So it's a wide range of topics, and the DAC itself can either do a short needs assessment survey about training needs, or as Scott said, if it's a diverse committee and represents people with various disabilities and various interests, probably can brainstorm and come up with some training issues itself. These can also, sometimes training can be done through handing out resources, articles to read, other things to do. But you know, having a training program, whether that's lunchtime workshops, through staff meetings, electronic newsletters, other means, is a very good thing for DACs to do. The other thing we've seen is regular communication with department staff. And again, here, technology is a great help in this. Sometimes that can be via a newsletter, again, sent electronically. Some DACs have their own intranet, where they post on a regular basis information about their minutes, their meetings, resources, and all kinds of other things. That's a really good strategy. And then the last one that I'll talk about is be a resource to the department. The winning DACs that we've seen make themselves of value and ask the department and its leadership, what do you need and how can we help you? Here is our charge, but you know, we want to be responsive to the department and its needs. Some of them have specifically looked at, and I totally agree with Dan that the DACs and certainly ACCED are not there to solve individual personnel issues, but we have seen where DACs recognize that there was a problem, say, in a building that was brought forth by one or more employees, and then they have kind of become the catalyst to try to make sure that accessibility is improved in that particular area. Other times it might be that there was not a sufficient plan for evacuation in terms of disaster planning for people with disabilities. So they've become a resource and either brought in people or gotten and provided resources to the department. As Scott says, and I would agree too, that sometimes the DAC members are the ones that have the expertise and knowledge. And so in addition, maybe to providing some general recommendations, they might not be totally prescriptive, but they certainly might say to the department, here are some a menu of specific ideas and activities that would help you be able to move forward and make progress in this particular area. So I'm going to stop and turn it back over to Dan, who I think is going to give you even more specifics, and then we're going to open up for questions and answers. So Dan? Are you muted?
I think I'm trying to unmute. I'm unmuted. Okay, fine. Okay. Technology, yeah, actually, thank you, Catherine. You've actually touched base, I guess, on everything I was looking at, and I hope to give you guys a little bit more detail to some of the things that Catherine has said, because a lot of it mirror images what I was going to touch on. I guess, first of all, I want to say, go back to Catherine, again, looking at some of the departments, and I'll share with you some departments I think that help empower the disability community to be more a part of it, is that the DAC, and I agree, EE officers have a specific responsibility to report. I think that those departments where they empower the DAC to be more active and participate and help provide support and resources, they seem to thrive. They do well. So I think empowerment is the key, is the word I was thinking of here. So anyway, again, a couple of things. Again, I want to just touch base real quick, and I'll give some examples. You know, strong leadership and support is great. We talked about the intranet, the use of that, and I'll talk about a couple of departments using the intranet and trainings and so forth. I think those are key areas. Okay, in the most recent, one of the most recent winners, and both in all of them, what we do see is strong leadership. Leadership such that when they report to us, it's not evident that the EE officer reports once a year. They have one meeting and they talk about a few things and that's it. You can see that the director is meeting and engaged with the DAC on a more periodic basis, and sometimes more, at times, more involved because of a certain activity going on, and they're participating. They're actually providing, you know, support and leadership via maybe through the intranet, providing information to the staff at large about an upcoming event that she feels or they feel is important. That seems to drive a lot. And I actually, I'm going to outline. I don't like to outline departments, but I'm going to have to outline in this case, Calpers. Calpers really struck me and struck actually the reviewers. I'm not involved in reviewing the nominations. We have a committee, and Calpers stood up really strong, mainly because of some of these issues we're talking about here. I looked at her nomination packet afterwards, and you can see from what they illustrated in this and presented that there's a strong body there. And I say it starts with the leadership. Now, at CalHR, they have a group, and I'm trying to find my notes here. It's part of their, it's the Calpers Diversity and Inclusion Group, which is a bigger group that sort of oversees all types of diversity issues, but included in there is the DAC. But the DAC actually, what's in power there is she's given them, and the DAC not just works by themselves in their one little section. They're inclusive in all the meetings. And so at the diversity inclusion meetings, the DACs interact with them and share their experiences, their issues, address issues. When they have intranet, when they have their meetings, all diversity inclusion group members are, in fact, the entire department that can participate. They've had situations where they've had up to 170 consumers on the intranet participating, watching a presentation or having a discussion or whatever it was. I'm not clear about that, but what I think what's important there is, in this one case, they used the intranet as a real tool, and they made it more inclusive. And because of the intranet, which some departments have, and I recognize some of the smaller departments here may not have that access, but I just use this as an example. What my point here is having an open program to the workforce. I mean, being open to it, not having your own inclusive little small DAC meeting on a certain day by yourself. That when you have it, it's open up to listen, for anybody to listen to or participate. I think that's great. And because of the intranet, this department, which is a large department, has statewide capacity. So individuals in San Diego or down in Los Angeles, they can participate. Whereas in the past, before we had COVID and intranet, you mainly had to be here. So that helps a lot. But what also makes, and that actually comes from leadership. The leader is willing to keep things open and have a dialogue and have people have access to this information, which I think is so important. for example, like I mentioned, there's like the 180 people on their distribution list within Calpers that gets notices about activities, webinars, training, policy changes, or anything like that. They interact that way. What is also interesting with them, which is a little bit different. Now we talk about the DAC committee, and I think it requires the DAC committee to have their own sort of formal committee. They have broadened their committee to be more, not only have that, they have the core committee of the chair and the secretary and so forth, and a work program to take notes and so forth. But when they open up, they also ask members at large. Any Calper person can say, I want to be part of the DAC team. They don't have to be an officer, but they can be participating. So they've kind of broadened the number of people that can be a part of the DAC, which is really interesting. And I think in a sense that adds leadership. It gets the information out to all these other different individuals who hear about this. So when things come up, they could be, they could be managers and be hearing this stuff and following it. Oh, there's some information about maybe, about disability, or I'm going to hire a person with disability. Now, they'll be included and know where to go to get information. I think that opens up so much for this department. Let's see. One of the other things. Let's see. Okay. Anyway, so I think, again, going back to, now with the intranet, which we see a lot of departments doing training. They're doing training on specific types of disabilities and the functionality and what goes on and how to understand the disability, which I think is great. But I think what's more important I've been seeing for those departments, and not just the ones that won, but there's several other doing them, but some of them are not really at this point where they're putting I call functionality or pragmatism, is that, okay, we got to be an accessible workforce. So let's put some training and resources for a staff person who's writing something up, a report or a presentation, and they can go to it and understand how to make it accessible. They're developing systems inside the program to encourage and promote individuals and the staff to be empowered to understand accessibility. One department has put together a video that really talks about the reasonable accommodation process, how to start, and goes all the way through. It's that Department of Justice, and which I think is great. That's something that a manager could have, or an individual, if they say, okay, I need to understand this. What's the department's policy? They go to this resource, and they can in their department click on it and see the process, and it's kind of open to both managers and staff. I think that's pretty good. Let's see. Again, like we're doing presentations on this type of disability, and we're seeing a lot of presentations on hidden disabilities. So we talked about, we have mental health. We also have a person mentioned earlier, chronic fatigue. They have other disability types that are not really apparent, learning disabilities, traumatic brain injury, and so forth. There's a lot of them that are not really apparent that you're seeing a lot more, and I think that's good too. Let's see. Talk about the lunch programs, training, education, network. I recognize some of the things I talk about here really kind of help, or kind of are good for those large departments that have certain things. Some don't. What I try to do is have the large departments help work with the smaller departments to figure out how they get around. I mean, some of our DACs are very small, and they're kind of having to merge with another DAC to do things. I don't know how that impacts their ability to have an intranet or so forth. But anyway, some of this applies to the larger. But in the end, one of the things I'm seeing at the end of looking through all the programs it still comes down to doing the, and I say, some of the smaller departments are doing some of these programs on their own in their own little way, and they should just keep on doing it. But everything comes back to me when I'm reviewing and looking at nominations is deal with the basics. If you look at the legal part that we were talking about earlier, it's to help do an assessment of your program as it relates to if you're underrepresented, developing a plan, and then implement that plan. I think some of these cases could be a 5-year plan because it's hard. If you're trying to come up with parity, there's issues internally. It could be attitudinal, it could be programmatic, whatever, could be access. Takes time to address. So if you have a plan that is sort of set up to where you have your long-term goals down the road, maybe 5 years, and your short-term, what are these different activities? I mean, the training activities, the events, the awareness activities, maybe the working with your personnel or suggesting that personnel contact the Department of Rehab, look at this pathways that we were talking about earlier. Or again, if you're looking at your specialty type of a program and you need to find some people with disabilities, maybe that HR makes a connection with schools that work or train people in this area to let them know that at times you have openings, you may need, you're looking for maybe referrals of people that might have the skill sets to be able to apply for a job or go to an association. There's every profession seems to have an association. You might be able to make some contacts there, but the point being is that you have a plan, short-term plan to work on through, and then you assess yourself and come back and then look at your accomplishments at the end of the year and then reassess it and move ahead. So that at the end of all this is that we start to see the change in your hiring, retention, and promotion of people with disabilities down the road 5 years from now, and because you're collecting data on that. And so that's what you're trying to work towards. So again, one of the things key things I want to do is encourage DACs to do this assessment, develop this plan, and then work the plan. And that could be reflected in your nominations. I think that's one of the things of those that are successful too, have actually reported back on their accomplishments and what they're doing. So this shows to me that there's sort of a focused plan that they're working on, or it shows to us, I should say. But for me as a reviewer, when I did review, that's what I kind of look for, was where were you, or what are you doing? And it might not necessarily be real earthquake shattering, but you see strong movement. I give a lot of credit then to programs that are doing that when I'm looking at the nominations when I was a reviewer, because I think that shows movement. And so anyway, I think I'll leave it at that. Is there anything that Scott or Catherine you wanted to add to what I just said before we give it back to Bobby and open for questions?
No, this is Catherine. I just wanted to add a little something. I'd be curious to see Scott and Dan, what other suggestions you have, but this thing that's coming across about what do you do, and the key issue being supportive agency leadership, and what do you do if you don't have that? I think that, I would not give up because you don't have that on having a strong and effective DAC. But I think in a couple of strategies that I would recommend is, I think Dan talked now about this issue of connectedness or intersectionality between the committees that might be representing employees from ethnic minority groups, women, if there's any focus on LGBTQ issues. We all came from the same civil rights perspective that, people didn't, we weren't allowed to participate or have equal access because of what people thought about us and our characteristic. And then, the laws kind of changed, but there's still a lot of issues around attitudes, discrimination, exclusion. So teaming with those other groups, and of course, all of our differences go across. You can be a person with a disability of color, you can be LGBTQ and be a person with a disability. So finding your allies in those other groups, and then keep trying to reinforce to the existing leadership the need for a diverse workforce. I'd find the governor's directions on diversity and inclusion, which does include people with disabilities. But I would also ask the leadership, here's our charge. Now, within that, what can we do to be helpful to you? We want you to look good. We don't want you to have to write these reports that are corrective action reports because you haven't hired enough people with disabilities. We want to help this whole department look really good. So what can we do within that? We're not here to blame you or to be enemies. We're here to make our workforce, inclusive and let people shine and do their best. So those are some of the strategies. I wonder, Dan and Scott, if you have other ideas when people have department leadership that isn't particularly supportive.
No, I think your suggestions were great there. I think you need to look for common support. That's what I liked about Calpers. I mean, you have one DAC that's really focused on disability, but the Calpers, and I'm trying to find the term they use. It's called the Diversity and Inclusion Group. They're addressing other issues, which could be to LGBT, could be ethnicity, could be other types of inclusionary populations, and they can go to them, and they're kind of supporting each other all the way through. I think that's really great. It just shows that diversity is probably working. Bobby, I know you're short on time. Are you short on time? How are we doing?
We're fine. We just have Director Susan Maroy. I see her just joining us, so she's going to be our next guest if you have a couple of more minutes.
Yeah.
And if we don't have adequate time for ACSED, please post your questions. I'm going to convey to them, and I'll get back to you with their responses in the event that we did not have adequate time to get to your questions.
Okay, that's good. I appreciate that. If you can do that for us. But if after this is over and you didn't post, and if anybody has any questions from this, if you go to accedonline.org and go to our contact, you can put your name in there and put your question in, tell me who you are, your address, your phone number, whatever if you have any more information, if we can help, we'll get back with you. That's how you can contact us and get a hold of any one of us. So, but go on. Is there any questions we can answer before we move on?
Again, I think there are a few comments that are posted in chat, which I'm going to convey to you for a response. And we also sent out a summary, and all of this event is recorded and going to be published in YouTube as well. But we'll take your questions, we'll convey to ACSED, we'll get their responses back to you. And thank you, panelists. You've been a wonderful source of information. Very empowering message of the historic background of DAC, and how you can be an effective DAC is a very powerful and empowering tools that you've just offered. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Bobby, for the opportunity. Thank you.
You're welcome.